what are your thoughts on this bill?
Well, I think that what it represents is lawmakers increasingly feeling that they have to grapple with the notion of China's international tech ambitions and the possibility that they could really be setting the rules for the web, not just in China for their 1 billion plus people, but here in the United States. Do they set the content rules on TikTok? Do they set the surveillance rules on their various apps and platforms? So I think this is a response by Hawley, and of course he had that hearing a week or two ago where he was very angry at TikTok and Apple for not showing up. So I think this is their response, and you're seeing this sort of question go throughout the government right now.
And Kurt, is this the kind of protection that big tech wants, that consumers want?
Probably to some extent. Yeah, we've seen Facebook in particular, but also Google and others kind of push for regulation. And what they really mean is that they want to be involved in shaping regulation. So if they can have some type of guidelines or rules that are written down where they can really just follow those to a T, and that kind of solves all of their issues, that looks good for them, especially if it keeps, potential upstarts or startups from catching up. They have such a strong advantage. So, in this case, TikTok is obviously a threat, I think, to Facebook. And so if there are certain regulations that, they might hurt Facebook a little bit, but if they really hurt a foreign competitor like TikTok, they might be on board with something like that.
And Ben, thankfully we have you on a day when there just continues to be more and more proposed legislation coming out. Today we got another headline that the FTC is saying that they are looking at multiple tech antitrust probes that are underway, and that they are going to review all of these antitrust laws in the wake of all of these new big tech probes. Does this indicate that the size and scope is bigger than what we thought before?
I think absolutely. We know that both the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Justice Department are doing these sort of wide-ranging probes into digital marketplaces, and they all sort of look like they're all doing Google, Facebook, Amazon, and Apple. Now, we know that DOJ is formally looking into both Google and Facebook. We know that FTC is formally looking into Facebook. Facebook is subject to both of them right now. What we don't know is whether they are doing those other companies. And I think Chairman Simons raised the question today that they may be doing all four of those, or at least two or three. And if I were an investor in that company, I'd definitely be looking at the question of how intense that scrutiny has gotten.
And Kurt, does this meet the level of barrier or the bar that needs to be set in terms of does it harm competition when you look at all four of the big tech companies that potentially now could be in play?
That's the ultimate question, is that, and Facebook, again, has talked about this the most, primarily because we know about those investigations and they've talked a little bit more openly about it. But their argument has basically been none of the accusations are really about harming consumers, right? We are being penalized because we're big, and that is our only crime. And so that will be a question that we'll start exploring, I'm sure, as these investigations move forward in the targeted advertising field, when you have Facebook and Google and Amazon is starting to get into that. When you talk about app stores, right, with Google and Apple having these really dominant app stores. So it's tough to say if anyone is being harmed or who's being harmed in what way, but those are the ultimate questions that we're going to be looking at.
Ben, I was looking at another story about Google and Facebook donating now to privacy groups and think tanks, and this sort of extends their reach beyond just traditional lobbyists, in which, lobbying, we understand that's sort of a normal course of business. How much does it concern you now that you see big donations from Facebook and Google and the likes really to these privacy advocacy groups, to all of these think tanks that in some ways appear to be neutral?
I think that's exactly the point. This is not traditional lobbying. This is about shaping the narrative. This is about shaping the conversation somewhat as it goes out to the public, but also just as it sort of appears to the Washington class here, among reporters, among staff, among lawmakers. And it's always a concern when you're going to an event, when you're going to a talk, how balanced is this? Who is presenting? What biases do they have? Do we know their biases? What's disclosed about it? It's absolutely a part of how I think everybody here in Washington is weighing this policy-making process. And I think that these groups will often push back and say, you know, we have lots of different corporate donations and lots of different sponsorships, and you know, we put forth you know, the best solutions that we think we can. Some groups are more forthright and even-handed about it, and some groups are largely captured by these companies and essentially putting forth their agendas in shadow lobbying.
And Kurt, when you were looking through some of these think tanks, companies that we know of, Cato Institute, Access Now, Center for Democracy and Technology, what stood out to you the most in terms of the size of the donation and if it really is influencing them? Well,
what stood out is that it's hard to exactly say, because some of these were hundreds of thousands of dollars. Some of these I think were as low as, you know, $10,000 donation. What does that really buy you, right? And I think when it comes down to it, this is a play about leverage. This is a play about relationships, as with all of these kinds of donations in DC. You want to have be able to pick up the phone and probably make a call to someone. You want to be able to get your point of view across. And when you have that existing relationship, it's probably easier to do that. So it's a little bit tough to say exactly how much, you know, the dollar amount you could almost set aside, right? This is about building a relationship with people who have the ear of the media and the general public, and I think that's what these companies are trying to do.